Montana Territory, 1873. The frontier stretched endless beneath the summer sky, a land where hope and hardship walked hand in hand. Here, men measured their worth by calloused palms and straight shooting, while dreams either withered under the merciless sun or took root in the rare fertile ground of opportunity. For Asher Flynn, the frontier was no place for fairy tales or romance, only survival and the next day's work. Love was a luxury afforded to those with something to offer beyond strong arms and a steady aim. The Broken Spur Ranch sprawled across the eastern foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, its boundaries marked more by natural features than any man-made fence. At 25, Asher had already weathered 5 brutal Montana winters working cattle, his young face beginning to show lines from squinting against sun and snow. He was handsome in a rugged way, tall and lean with dark blonde hair that curled slightly when too long between trimmings, and eyes the color of prairie sage. Unlike many cowboys who embraced the rough edges of frontier life, he kept himself reasonably clean-shaven when possible, a habit from his eastern upbringing. "Flynn, get those strays moving before sundown," Foreman Tanner bellowed from horseback. Asher dug his heels into his horse's sides, guiding the animal with practiced ease toward the wandering cattle. The work was hard, the pay meager, but it suited him. No attachments, no disappointments. After watching his father waste away from heartbreak following his mother's death, Asher had decided long ago that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. His father had been an educated man, a schoolteacher who'd followed love west only to be left hollow and empty. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and enough sense to use both properly, he muttered to himself, an affirmation he'd repeated countless times. That evening, as the ranch hands gathered around the cook fire, tales flowed as freely as the coffee. Men spoke of sweethearts back east, of land claims they hoped to stake, of fortunes to be made. Asher listened silently, knowing better than to build castles in the air. Ranch hands were just that, hands. Replaceable, forgettable. The cowboy life was transient, moving with the seasons, never putting down roots. That's what he'd been taught, what he believed. "Say, Flynn, you ever think about settling down?" asked young Billy Hoskins, barely 17 and still soft around the edges. "No point in it," Asher replied, staring into the flames. "We're just passing through this world. No sense pretending otherwise." The other men exchanged knowing glances. Asher Flynn was good with horses, better with a lasso, but locked up tighter than a winter cabin when it came to matters of the heart. What Asher truly wanted, though he'd never admit it, was permanence. Something solid to grasp in a world of shifting sands. But what he needed, what his soul hungered for beneath layers of practiced indifference, was connection. Someone to see in him what he couldn't see in himself, worth beyond the labor of his hands. The following Saturday brought most of the Broken Spur hands into the small but growing town of Pinecrest for supplies and whatever entertainment could be found. Asher had no interest in the saloon's watered-down whiskey or card games that separated fools from their wages. Instead, he headed toward the general store to replenish his dwindling supply of tobacco and perhaps splurge on a new book, his secret indulgence. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and that's when he saw her, standing at the counter in a simple blue calico dress that somehow made her look like the sky itself had come down to earth. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a neat bun, though several rebellious strands had escaped to frame a face that stopped Asher's heart mid-beat. She couldn't have been more than 22, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone much older. "I'm sorry, Miss Hammond, but your father's credit is extended as far as I can allow," Mr. Peterson, the store owner, was saying. His voice held genuine regret, but firm resolve. "I understand, Mr. Peterson. We'll manage somehow." Her voice was steady, but Asher caught the slight tremor in her hands as she returned items to the counter. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, and rain began to tap against the windows. The young woman glanced toward the door with visible concern. "Miss Hammond, you're welcome to wait out the storm here," Peterson offered. "Thank you, but Father will worry if I'm late. The wagon's just outside." As she moved toward the door, Asher found himself stepping forward. "Miss, I couldn't help overhearing. Perhaps I could be of assistance." She turned, and Asher felt the full impact of eyes the color of amber honey. They widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. And who might you be, sir? Asher Flynn, ma'am. I work at the Broken Spur. He removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his work-worn appearance. Emma Hammond, she replied with a small nod. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Flynn, but I wouldn't want to impose. The rain intensified, beating a violent tattoo against the roof. Peterson peered out the window. That's going to be a mud bath out there, Miss Hammond. Your wagon might not make it through the lower creek crossing if this keeps up. Decision made. Asher placed his hat back on his head. Miss Hammond, I'd be happy to escort you home. My horse is strong enough for both of us if your wagon proves troublesome. Emma studied him, weighing her limited options against her clear discomfort with accepting help from a stranger. Something in his expression must have reassured her, for she finally nodded. Very well, Mr. Flynn. I accept your offer. The ride began in awkward silence, with Emma directing him toward a small homestead north of town. The rain slashed down in gray sheets, turning the dirt road into a treacherous slide. When they reached the creek crossing, Asher's prediction proved correct. It was already swollen beyond what her light wagon could safely ford. We'll need to take the high trail, he shouted over the storm. May I? He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Emma allowed him to help her onto his horse. They abandoned the wagon under a stand of cottonwoods, securing it as best they could before continuing on horseback. With Emma seated before him, Asher was acutely aware of her presence. The faint scent of lavender soap, the warmth of her body against his chest as they navigated the slippery trail. It was the closest he'd been to a woman in years, and it stirred something in him he thought long buried. You're new to these parts, he observed, desperate to break the intimate silence. My father and I arrived last fall. He purchased the old Miller place. Asher knew it, a hardscrabble piece of land that had broken stronger men than most. Tough country to start fresh. We had little choice, she replied, her voice carrying a weight beyond her years. After my mother passed, Philadelphia held too many memories. I'm sorry for your loss, as am I for yours. When he stiffened in surprise, she added, Your eyes carry the same shadow my father's do. The rain eventually subsided, though the sky remained threatening. As they crested the final hill, a modest cabin came into view, smoke curling from its chimney. A small garden plot and chicken coop stood nearby, with a few acres of recently plowed fields stretching beyond. It's not much, Emma said, but we're making it home. The door of the cabin swung open, and an older man with a scholar's stoop and a farmer's weathered face emerged, rifle in hand. Emma, he called, relief and concern mingling in his voice. It's all right, Father, she called back. This is Mr. Flynn from the Broken Spur. He helped me when the creek flooded. Asher helped Emma dismount before swinging down himself. Her father approached, the rifle lowered but not set aside. Edward Hammond. The man introduced himself, extending his free hand. I appreciate you seeing my daughter safely home, sir. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Hammond. Asher shook his hand, noting the ink stains on the fingers, unusual for a homesteader. Your wagon's secure at Cottonwood Bend. I can help retrieve it once the water recedes. That's very kind, Edward replied, though wariness lingered in his gaze. Won't you come in for coffee before you ride back? The invitation surprised Asher, who'd expected to be politely but firmly dismissed. Thank you, sir. I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Emma interjected. It's the least we can offer. Inside, the cabin was humble but meticulously kept. What caught Asher's attention, however, were the books. Dozens of them lined the crude shelves along one wall. Volumes of poetry, history, science, and literature that seemed wildly out of place in a frontier homestead. You're a man of letters, Asher observed, unable to hide his interest. Edward Hammond's expression softened slightly. I was a professor of literature at Westford College. Now I'm learning to be a farmer, with limited success. His self-deprecating smile revealed the struggle behind the admission. As Emma prepared coffee, Asher found himself drawn into conversation with her father. They discussed books Asher had read during his lonely winters, authors they both admired, ideas that seemed to exist in a world far removed from Montana territory. You're educated, Edward remarked, surprise evident in his voice. How did you come to be a ranch hand? My father was a schoolteacher, Asher replied, the words coming more easily than he'd expected. He taught me to value knowledge, even after we came west. And yet you chose the cowboy's life. Asher's gaze drifted to the window, where the vast landscape stretched beyond. After he died, it seemed the logical choice. I'm good with horses, and a man needs to eat. Emma returned with coffee, her eyes reflecting newfound interest. Mr. Flynn helped Mrs. Peterson when her wagon broke an axle last month, she said. And Billy from the telegraph office says he taught him to read during evening shifts. Heat crept up Asher's neck. Simple kindnesses, nothing more. Kindness is never simple, Mr. Flynn, Emma replied softly. Not in this territory. When Asher finally departed, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the land. Edward Hammond shook his hand with genuine warmth, and Emma walked him to his horse. Thank you again, Mr. Flynn. Asher, please. She smiled, a brief but brilliant thing that caught him off guard. Asher, then, will you really help with the wagon? I gave my word, didn't I? He mounted his horse, suddenly eager to escape the unfamiliar feelings stirring within him. I'll return tomorrow, if that suits. Tomorrow would be fine. She hesitated, then added, perhaps you might stay for supper afterward. Father enjoyed your company. Just her father? The thought came unbidden, and Asher quickly pushed it aside. Until tomorrow, then, he said, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the broken spur. As he rode, Asher tried to dismiss the encounter as nothing more than a chance meeting, a good deed done. But Emma Hammond's amber eyes and quiet strength haunted him through the miles, challenging everything he thought he knew about his place in the world. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow with something akin to hope. True to his word, Asher returned the next day. What began as assistance with the wagon expanded to helping Edward mend fences damaged by the storm. One visit became 2, then 3, until the Hammond homestead became a regular Sunday destination for Asher after church services. Edward welcomed Asher's practical knowledge and strong back, while Emma appreciated his willingness to assist without the condescension many showed toward a woman and her aging father trying to make it alone on the frontier. For his part, Asher found himself drawn to their small family unit, to the warmth of their home despite its physical hardships, to the intellectual conversations around their humble table, and to Emma, whose quiet competence and unexpected humor revealed themselves gradually, like wildflowers blooming after rain. By midsummer, Asher had helped repair the barn, reinforced the cabin's roof, and tilled additional fields for fall planting. In return, the Hammonds offered him meals, conversation, and, most precious to him, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since his father's death. One July evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Edward excused himself, complaining of fatigue. When he'd gone inside, Emma turned to Asher. You've done so much for us, she said quietly. I don't know how to thank you. There's no need, Asher replied. I enjoy the work, the company. Still, there must be something you want in return. The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Asher hesitated, then chose honesty. To keep coming back, he admitted. That's payment enough. Emma studied him in the fading light. Why us? Why this place? Surely you have better options for your free time than helping a struggling homesteader and his daughter. Maybe I don't. Asher's gaze swept across the modest homestead. This place has something the ranch doesn't. What's that? Purpose. A future. He swallowed hard, venturing further than he'd intended. People building something lasting, not just passing through. Emma's expression softened. Is that what you want, Asher? Something lasting. I used to think cowboys weren't meant for permanence, he said carefully. That we're just meant to move with the seasons, never putting down roots. And now I'm not so certain. He met her gaze directly. Your father said something last week that's been on my mind. About how the characters in a story are shaped by their choices, not their circumstances. It made me wonder what choices I've been avoiding. Emma's hand moved across the rough-hewn bench until her fingers rested beside his, not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel their warmth. We all have choices, Asher. Even out here, where it sometimes feels like the territory chooses for us. In that moment, with twilight wrapping around them like a blanket, Asher nearly reached for her hand. But the sound of approaching horses shattered the fragile moment. 3 riders approached the homestead, their silhouettes dark against the purple sky. Asher rose, instinctively moving to stand between Emma and the visitors. As they drew closer, recognition dawned, along with concern. "Stay here," he told Emma, his voice low. "Those are Harlan Creek men. They don't have business this far north." The Harlan Creek outfit had a reputation for pushing boundaries, both geographical and legal. Their foreman, Victor Sloan, was known for underhanded tactics to expand their range at the expense of smaller operations. Sloan led the trio, his weathered face splitting into an unpleasant smile as he recognized Asher. "Well, if it ain't Flynn from the Broken Spur," he called, reining his horse to a stop. "Long way from home, ain't you?" "Just visiting friends," Asher replied neutrally. "What brings Harlan Creek men to these parts?" Sloan's gaze shifted to Emma, who had risen to stand beside Asher despite his instruction, paying a neighborly call on the professor and his daughter. He touched his hat brim. "Evening, Miss Hammond." Emma acknowledged him with a stiff nod. "Mr. Sloan, your father around? Got some business to discuss." "He's resting," Emma replied. "If you have business, you can speak with me." Sloan chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "This is men's talk, miss. About water rights and grazing access. Whatever you have to say to my father, you can say to me," Emma insisted, her chin lifting. "I handle our affairs as much as he does." "Is that so?" Sloan's expression hardened. "Then maybe you should know that your southern boundary markers have been moved. According to the county records, your property line runs along the lower creek, not above it." "That's not true," Emma protested. "Our deed clearly states, deeds can be misinterpreted," Sloan interrupted. "The county surveyor agrees with our reading." Asher stepped forward. "The county surveyor works for whoever pays him most. Those boundaries haven't changed in 15 years. You calling me a liar, Flynn? I'm saying there might be a misunderstanding that doesn't need to escalate." Sloan's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. "Seems to me you're involving yourself in matters that don't concern Broken Spur hands." The tension crackled between them until the cabin door opened and Edward Hammond appeared, shotgun in hand. "I believe you gentlemen are trespassing," he stated calmly. "Now, Professor, we're just trying to clarify a misunderstanding," Sloan said, his tone suddenly reasonable. "No need for firearms. There's no misunderstanding. Our boundaries are clearly marked in our deed." Edward's voice remained steady. "I'll be speaking with Judge Langston about this tomorrow." Sloan's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into forced affability. "You do that, Professor. But judges favor those who can develop land properly. A man and his daughter can only work so much acreage." His gaze swept meaningfully over their modest improvements. "Be ashamed to lose it all over a boundary dispute." "Good night, Mr. Sloan," Edward said firmly. With a final measuring look at Asher, Sloan wheeled his horse around. "Think about our offer, Hammond. Selling to us would be easier than fighting. Flynn here knows how things work in the territory." After they'd ridden away, Asher turned to find Edward leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face ashen. "Father," Emma rushed to his side. "I'm all right," Edward insisted, though his trembling hand belied his words. "Just a spell of weakness." They helped him inside, where he collapsed into his chair. When Emma had gone to fetch water, Edward gripped Asher's arm. "This isn't the first time," he confessed quietly. "They've been watching us, waiting for an opportunity. With my health failing and Emma alone." "You're not alone," Asher said firmly. "And your boundaries are legal. The judge will confirm it." Edward's sad smile spoke volumes. "Justice isn't always forthcoming on the frontier, son, especially for those without power or influence." That night, riding back to the Broken Spur under a canopy of stars, Asher's mind raced with possibilities and fears. The Hammond situation was precarious, Edward's health clearly declining, Emma struggling to maintain the homestead, and now Harlan Creek circling like vultures. His instinct was to distance himself from their troubles. He'd seen good people broken by the unforgiving territory before, but something had changed in him over these summer weeks. The thought of abandoning Emma and her father to Sloan's machinations made his stomach clench with a physical pain. For the first time since his father's death, Asher found himself caring deeply about what happened to others, caring enough to risk his carefully constructed detachment. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The lone wolf philosophy that had protected him for years suddenly felt hollow compared to the warmth he'd found at the Hammond homestead, to Emma's quiet strength and gentle humor, to the possibility of something more than merely surviving from season to season. As the lights of the ranch came into view, Asher made his decision. Whatever came next, he would not abandon the Hammonds to face it alone. Some things, he was beginning to understand, were worth the risk of attachment. The following weeks brought escalating tensions. True to Edward's prediction, Judge Langston proved reluctant to intervene in the boundary dispute, citing the need for a professional survey that the Hammonds could ill afford. Meanwhile, Harlan Creek hands began grazing cattle on the contested land, deliberately trampling the Hammonds' newly planted fields. Asher did what he could, spending every free moment at the homestead and enlisting several broken spur cowboys to help with repairs and protection. His foreman, though grumbling about divided loyalties, turned a blind eye to Asher's frequent absences as long as his regular duties were completed. One evening in late August, Asher arrived at the Hammond place to find Emma alone, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "It's father," she said before he could ask. "The doctor says his heart is failing. He may not last the winter." Asher's chest tightened with shared grief. Over the summer, Edward Hammond had become the closest thing to family he'd had in years. "I'm so sorry, Emma. Is there anything I can do?" She shook her head, then surprised him by stepping into his arms. He held her while she wept, her tears soaking through his shirt. When she finally pulled back, her expression had shifted from despair to determination. "Harlan Creek sent another offer today," she said. "Significantly less than before, but enough to take father back east for proper treatment." Asher's heart sank. "You're considering it? What choice do I have? Father needs medical care I can't provide here. And without him," she gestured helplessly around the homestead. "I can't work this land alone, not with Sloan pressuring us from all sides." "You're not alone, Emma," Asher said fiercely. She looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "Aren't I? You've been wonderful, Asher, truly. But you have your own life, your work at the Broken Spur. I can't ask you to take on our burdens." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "Offering what, exactly?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer Asher wasn't sure he was ready to give. What was he offering? Continued assistance? Friendship? Or something deeper that he'd been afraid to name, even to himself? Before he could respond, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a gallop. They recognized the Broken Spur brand on the horse. It was young Billy Hoskins, his face flushed with exertion. "Flynn," he called as he neared. "Trouble at the North Pasture. Harlan Creek men are running off our cattle and setting fires." Asher cursed under his breath. The North Pasture bordered Hammond land. This was no coincidence. "A diversion," he said to Emma, "to draw men away from here." Her eyes widened in understanding. "Father's alone. Get inside and lock the doors," Asher instructed. "I'll send Billy for the sheriff and come back as soon as I can." "Be careful," Emma whispered, her hand briefly touching his arm. The touch lingered like a brand as Asher rode toward the smoke rising from the North Pasture. His suspicions were confirmed when he found only a small grass fire and a handful of scattered cattle, hardly the emergency Billy had described. When he turned back toward the Hammond place, he spotted 3 riders heading in the same direction, taking a roundabout route to avoid detection. Sloan was making his move. Asher pushed his horse to its limits, cutting across country to intercept the Harlan Creek men. He arrived at the homestead just as Sloan and his companions were forcing their way into the cabin. Edward stood in the doorway, shotgun raised despite his evident weakness. "This is still my property, Sloan," Edward was saying, his voice stronger than his body appeared. "I haven't signed anything." "The way I see it, Professor, you don't have much choice," Sloan replied, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Your girls agreed to our terms. Be a shame if an accident happened before the papers were signed." "The only accident about to happen is you mistaking me for someone who'll stand by while you threaten good people," Asher called out, dismounting with his rifle in hand. Sloan turned, his expression darkening when he recognized Asher. "Flynn, should have known you'd interfere. This ain't Broken Spur business." "No, it's personal," Asher replied, advancing steadily. "Mr. Hammond is a friend, and you're trespassing on his land." "Friend, is it?" Sloan sneered. "Heard you've been mighty friendly with the daughter, too. That what this is about? Staking your claim on more than just the land." "Step away from the door, Sloan." Asher raised his rifle. "The sheriff's been sent for." One of Sloan's men, a weasel-faced character named Dunn, drew his pistol. "We can be long gone before any sheriff arrives, with signed papers in hand." Everything happened at once. Dunn aimed at Asher. Edward swung his shotgun toward the immediate threat, and Sloane reached for Edward. A shot cracked the air, Dunn's pistol discharging as Asher dove for cover. Edward collapsed, clutching his chest, whether from a wound or his weak heart. Asher couldn't tell. From inside the cabin, Emma screamed her father's name. When she appeared in the doorway, Sloane grabbed her, using her as a shield. Drop the rifle, Flynn, or the girl gets hurt. Asher hesitated, his finger tense on the trigger. The third Harlan Creek man had his gun trained on Asher, while Dunn kept his aimed at the fallen Edward. It was a standoff with Asher seriously outnumbered. Let her go, Sloane, Asher said, his voice deadly calm despite the fear coursing through him. This won't end well for anyone. Oh, it'll end just fine for me, Sloane replied. Miss Hammond is going to sign over their deed right now, in exchange for her father's life and yours. Emma struggled in Sloane's grip. I'll sign nothing. You shot my father. That was an accident, Sloane growled. But what happens next won't be. The sound of approaching horses momentarily distracted everyone. Relief flooded Asher when he recognized the Broken Spur brand. Reinforcements had arrived, likely alerted by Billy that something was wrong. Seeing his advantage slipping away, Sloane made a desperate move. He dragged Emma toward his horse, clearly intending to use her as a hostage for his escape. Stay back, he shouted at the approaching riders. Or she dies. In that critical moment, Asher made his choice. Dropping his rifle as a show of compliance, he called out, Wait. Take me instead. Sloane paused. You? I'm more valuable as a hostage, Asher said, stepping forward with hands raised. Ranch foreman will negotiate for me. This girl? Nobody will care. No, Emma cried, renewing her struggles. Asher kept his eyes locked on Sloane's, slowly advancing. Let her go to her father. Take me, and you still have leverage. Sloane hesitated, his greed warring with suspicion. That brief moment of indecision was all Asher needed. As he came within reach, he lunged, tackling Sloane and freeing Emma from his grasp. They crashed to the ground, wrestling for control of Sloane's pistol. A shot rang out, then another. Pain exploded in Asher's side, but adrenaline kept him fighting until strong hands pulled him away. The Broken Spur men had arrived in force, disarming the Harlan Creek crew and restraining them. Flynn, you hit. It was Foreman Tanner, his weathered face creased with concern. Check on Hammond, Asher gasped, pressing his hand against his bleeding side. And Emma, I'm here, she said, suddenly beside him. Her face was pale but resolute as she tore strips from her petticoat to staunch his wound. Hold still, you foolish man. Through the haze of pain, Asher managed a weak smile. Your father? Alive. It was his heart, not a bullet. Her voice caught. Thanks to you. As they waited for the doctor to arrive from town, Emma sat with Asher on the porch while the sheriff took statements from everyone involved. The Harlan Creek men, including a cursing Sloane, were taken into custody for attempted murder and land fraud. Apparently, they'd been forging documents to support their boundary claims. Why did you do it? Emma asked softly. You could have been killed. Asher winced as he shifted to look at her. Couldn't let them hurt you. But to offer yourself as a hostage seemed like the right thing to do at the time. He attempted a light tone despite the seriousness in her eyes. No one's ever stood up for us like that, she said. Not since we came west. Maybe you just hadn't met the right people yet. Emma studied him for a long moment. The territory changes people, Father says. Makes them harder, or breaks them entirely. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. But it hasn't changed you, has it? Not at the core. Asher considered this. Maybe it did, just not in the way I expected. He squeezed her hand gently. I thought surviving out here meant keeping to myself, not letting anyone close enough to matter. But that's not surviving, it's just existing. And now I'm thinking maybe there's more to life than just making it to the next day. He held her gaze steadily. If you're willing to see where this leads. Emma's smile bloomed slowly, like a sunrise. I think I'd like that very much, Asher Flynn. The autumn months brought healing, for Asher's wound, for Edward's fragile health, and for the Hammond homestead. With Sloane and his men facing justice, the boundary dispute was resolved in the Hammonds' favor. The judge, eager to make amends for his earlier reluctance, expedited the official survey. Asher made a decision that surprised everyone except those who knew him best. He left the Broken Spur, using his modest savings to purchase a small tract of land adjacent to the Hammond property. Though he maintained good relations with his former employers, often helping with seasonal roundups, his primary focus became building a future connected to the Hammond homestead. By Christmas, Edward's health had stabilized enough for him to officiate at small gatherings, including the holiday service at the town church. Afterward, as snow fell gently outside the Hammond cabin, Asher found himself alone with Emma for the first time in weeks. "I have something for you," he said, withdrawing a small package from his coat pocket. Emma unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book of poetry, Tennyson, her favorite. Inside the cover, he had written, "To Emma, who showed me that the frontier has room for both strength and tenderness." "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the inscription with her finger. "There's something else," Asher said, his voice suddenly husky with emotion. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band, his mother's wedding ring, the one possession of hers he'd kept through all his wandering years. "I can't offer you wealth or an easy life," he said, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she must hear it. "I'm only a simple ranch hand trying to make something more of himself. But everything I am, everything I hope to be, I offer to you, if you'll have me." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Asher Flynn, do you truly not know what you mean to me?" She took his face between her hands. "You're everything I need. Everything." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it was as if a piece of himself that had been adrift for years finally found its mooring. Their kiss was gentle, yet full of promise, for the life they would build together, for the family they would create, for the love that would sustain them through whatever hardships the territory might still bring. Spring arrived early that year, painting the hills with wildflowers and new growth. On a perfect April morning, with the mountains standing witness in the distance, Asher and Emma exchanged vows before family and friends. Edward, looking stronger than he had in months, proudly gave his daughter away. "Take care of each other," he told them, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the true secret to surviving the frontier, not isolation, but connection." After the celebration, Asher led his bride to the surprise he'd been working on for months, a new home built on the land connecting their properties. It was modest but solid, with large windows to capture the stunning views and bookshelves lining one entire wall. "Our beginning," he said as he carried her across the threshold. "Built on both our lands, belonging to both of us." That evening, as they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors, Emma leaned against her husband's chest. "Are you happy?" she asked. Asher's arms tightened around her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I spent so many years convinced that cowboys weren't meant for permanence, that attachment only led to pain. I was so wrong, Emma." "We both were," she replied. "I thought coming west meant giving up dreams, accepting a life of mere survival." She turned in his arms to face him. "But this is more than survival. This is living. This is home." Asher agreed, looking out over their joined lands, the fields they would plant together, the cattle that would grow their herd, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the territory itself. As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared one by one until the sky was ablaze with their brilliance. In their light, two people who had once been lost found their way forward, together, stronger for having found each other, and certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. For on the frontier, where survival often depended on keeping one's distance, they had discovered the most enduring truth of all, that real strength comes not from standing alone, but from joining hearts and hands against the wilderness. And in that joining, finding not just survival, but a life worth living.